November 12, 1952. Marcus Holloway had been crawling through the Sonoran Desert for 3 days with a bullet lodged in his shoulder, knowing death was closing in with every scorching hour until 2 towering Apache warriors emerged from the heat waves, their eyes locked on him with an intensity that made his blood run cold. They could have left him to die like the buzzards circling overhead expected, but instead, they carried him to their hidden camp deep in the canyon where no white man had set foot in decades. What did they see in this dying stranger that made them break their most sacred law, and how would saving his life alter the fate of their people forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun had become Marcus Holloway's executioner. For 72 hours, it had beaten down on him with merciless fury as he dragged himself across the Sonoran Desert, leaving a trail of blood-soaked sand behind him. The bullet in his shoulder had long since stopped bleeding heavily, but the wound had turned a sickly purple color that he knew meant infection. His canteen had run dry yesterday morning, and his lips were so cracked they split open every time he tried to wet them with his swollen tongue. Marcus had stopped trying to remember how he'd ended up here. The details seemed unimportant now: the card game in Tucson, the accusation of cheating, the flash of a gun barrel in the lamplight. What mattered was that Jimmy Cortez, a 2-bit hustler with connections to the Morales gang, had put a bullet in him and left him for dead on the outskirts of town. Marcus had managed to steal a horse and ride west, thinking he could make it to the mining settlement at Copper Ridge, but the horse had spooked at a rattlesnake 2 days ago, throwing him hard against a rock formation before galloping off into the wilderness. Now, as the afternoon sun reached its peak, Marcus found himself at the base of a massive red rock canyon. His vision swam in and out of focus, and he could no longer feel his legs. He'd been crawling for the past 6 hours, using his good arm to pull himself forward while his useless left arm hung at his side like dead weight. The landscape around him shimmered and danced, playing tricks on his oxygen-starved brain. Once, he thought he saw his mother standing in the distance, waving at him from their old farmhouse porch in Missouri. Another time, he was certain he heard church bells ringing. Though the nearest town was 40 miles away, Marcus collapsed onto his back, no longer possessing the strength to move forward. Above him, 3 turkey vultures circled in lazy spirals, their shadows crossing his face in rhythmic intervals. He watched them with detached curiosity, wondering how long they would wait before descending. His father had once told him that vultures could smell death from miles away, that they knew when a creature had given up its fight for survival. Marcus supposed he had given up somewhere around mile marker 15, but his body had been too stubborn to accept it. The hallucinations were getting worse. Now he saw figures moving along the canyon rim, tall, impossibly tall figures that seemed to materialize from the rock itself. Marcus blinked hard, trying to clear his vision, but the figures remained. They were descending the canyon wall with an ease that defied the steep terrain, moving with a fluid grace that made them seem almost supernatural. As they drew closer, Marcus realized these weren't hallucinations at all. 2 Apache warriors stood before him, and they were giants. The first one had to be nearly 7 feet tall, his broad shoulders blocking out the sun as he leaned over Marcus. His face was weathered and carved with deep lines that spoke of countless desert seasons, and his eyes dark as obsidian studied Marcus with an intensity that cut through the fog of delirium. He wore traditional Apache clothing with intricate beadwork, and a medicine bag hung from a leather cord around his neck. His long black hair was streaked with silver and hung past his shoulders, moving slightly in the hot desert wind. The second warrior was younger, but equally imposing, standing at least 6.5 feet tall with the lean, powerful build of a mountain lion. His face was painted with red ochre markings that Marcus didn't recognize, and he carried a rifle that looked like it had seen action in more conflicts than Marcus could imagine. But what struck Marcus most were the man's eyes. They held a mixture of suspicion and something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow survivor. The older warrior spoke in Apache, his voice deep and resonant like distant thunder. Marcus didn't understand the words, but he heard the question in the man's tone. The younger warrior responded, gesturing toward Marcus's wound, then pointing back toward the canyon. They were debating something, Marcus realized. Debating whether he was worth saving. Marcus tried to speak, to plead for water, but his voice came out as nothing more than a pathetic croak. The effort sent a spike of pain through his chest, and he coughed weakly, tasting copper in his mouth. The older warrior held up his hand, silencing the younger one, and knelt beside Marcus. With surprising gentleness for such a massive man, he lifted Marcus's head and produced a water skin from his belt. The water was warm and tasted faintly of leather, but it was the most glorious thing Marcus had ever experienced. He gulped greedily until the warrior pulled the skin away, speaking in a firm tone that clearly meant, slowly. The younger warrior had moved to examine Marcus's shoulder, probing the wound with careful fingers. Marcus hissed in pain, and the young man said something to his companion that sounded like a diagnosis. The older warrior stood and looked down at Marcus for a long moment. Then he spoke in heavily accented English, each word carefully pronounced. "You die here, or you come with us. Choose." Marcus's mind raced despite his weakened state. Going with these men meant entering Apache territory, a place where white men were about as welcome as smallpox. But staying here meant certain death, probably within the next few hours. It wasn't much of a choice at all. "Come with you," Marcus managed to rasp out. The older warrior nodded once, as if this was the answer he'd expected. He spoke to the younger man in Apache, and together they fashioned a travois from branches they retrieved from somewhere Marcus couldn't see. The construction took less than 10 minutes, their movements efficient and practiced. They lifted Marcus onto the travois with surprising care, securing him with leather straps, and began pulling him across the desert floor toward the canyon. Journey became a blur of pain and half-consciousness. Marcus drifted in and out, aware of the jarring motion beneath him, the sound of his rescuers' voices speaking in their native tongue, the changing quality of light as they entered the canyons. Shadow. At some point, the terrain changed from flat desert to rocky incline, and Marcus felt the angle of the travois shift as they climbed. The temperature dropped noticeably, and he realized they must be ascending into the higher elevations when Marcus next opened his eyes fully. Night had fallen. He found himself in a cave lit by a small fire, its flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The older warrior sat nearby, mixing something in a clay bowl with methodical precision. The younger one was gone, but Marcus could hear voices outside the cave entrance, multiple voices, speaking in urgent, heated tones. The older warrior noticed Marcus was awake and brought the bowl over. Inside was a dark paste that smelled of herbs and something else Marcus couldn't identify. Without explanation, the warrior began unbinding Marcus's wound. The shoulder looked even worse than Marcus had feared, swollen, discolored, and seeping a clear fluid that definitely meant infection. The warrior applied the paste directly to the wound, and Marcus nearly blacked out from the searing pain. It felt like someone had poured liquid fire into his shoulder. "Medicine," the warrior said in his halting English. "Strong. You sleep now." Marcus wanted to ask 1,000 questions: where they were, why they'd saved him, what was happening outside the cave, but his body had other plans. Whatever was in that paste was already working its way into his system, dragging him down into a dark, dreamless sleep. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the warrior's face, illuminated by firelight, watching him with an expression that might have been compassion or might have been calculation. When Marcus woke again, it was to voices, arguing in Apache. He kept his eyes closed and his breathing steady, some instinct telling him to gather information before revealing he was conscious. The older warrior Marcus had started thinking of him as his savior was speaking in measured tones to several other men. The younger warrior was there too, his voice rising with what sounded like frustration or anger. Then another voice joined the conversation, older and carrying unmistakable authority. This voice silenced the others, speaking in short, decisive sentences. Marcus caught only one word he recognized, Bilagana, which he knew meant white man. The tone wasn't friendly. Footsteps approached, and Marcus decided to abandon his pretense. He opened his eyes to find himself looking up at an elderly Apache man who radiated power despite his advanced years. This man wore ceremonial clothing marked with symbols Marcus didn't understand, and his face was a roadmap of wrinkles that somehow made him look more formidable rather than frail. Behind him stood the two warriors who'd saved Marcus, along with 3 other Apache men whose expressions ranged from hostile to deeply suspicious. The elderly man studied Marcus for a long moment before speaking in perfect, unaccented English. "I am Nate, headman of this band. These are my people's mountains, and you are the first white man to see this place in 37 winters. The warriors who brought you here are my nephew, Deklugi, and his son, Taza. They have broken our most sacred law by bringing you to this camp. Now you must answer for their decision. Who are you, and why should we let you live?" Marcus's throat was still dry, but his mind was clearer than it had been in days. He understood immediately that his next words would determine whether he saw another sunrise. This wasn't a casual question, it was a judgment. "My name is Marcus Holloway," he began, his voice rough but steady. "I'm a gambler and a drifter. Nothing special. 3 days ago, a man named Jimmy Cortez shot me over a card game in Tucson and left me to die. I don't have family waiting for me. I don't have any government connections, and nobody's going to come looking for me. I'm nobody's hero and nobody's enemy, just a man who got unlucky at the wrong card table." Nature's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You tell us you are worthless. This is not a compelling argument for your survival." "I didn't say I was worthless," Marcus corrected, meeting the old man's gaze. "I said I was nobody special. There's a difference. I've made my living reading people, understanding what they want and what they fear. And I can see that you didn't. What me brought here, but Deklugi and Taza did it anyway, which means they saw something in me worth the risk. I don't know what that something is, but I'd like the chance to find out." For the first time, Nature's lips twitched with what might have been amusement. He turned and spoke to Deklugi in Apache, his tone questioning. The big warrior responded at length, gesturing to Marcus several times during his explanation. The other men listened intently, and Marcus noticed their expressions beginning to shift from outright hostility to something more complex doubt, perhaps a reluctant interest. Nate turned back to Marcus. "Deklugi says you have the eyes of a man who has walked with death but refused to follow. He says when he found you, you were still trying to crawl forward even though your body had given up. He has seen many men die in the desert, and he says most of them lie down and accept it long before the end. But you kept fighting. This interests him." Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he remained silent. "There is more," Nate continued. 3 days ago, Deklugi had a vision while on his medicine walk. He saw a white man lying in the sand, and he saw a great eagle descending from the sky to perch on the man's chest. The eagle spoke to Deklugi in the old language, telling him that this man carried a debt that must be repaid, and that his presence would test the strength of our people. When Deklugi found you yesterday, he recognized you from his vision." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine despite the cave's warmth. He'd never put much stock in visions and prophecies. His world was one of cards and odds, of cold calculation and hard reality. But looking at Deklugi's face, seeing the absolute conviction there, Marcus found himself wondering if maybe there were forces at work beyond his understanding. What debt Marcus asked quietly. Nate shook his head. The vision did not say. Perhaps it is a debt you owe. Perhaps it is a debt owed to you. Or perhaps it is a debt that has not yet been created. Visions speak in riddles, showing us paths without revealing destinations. The old man sat down cross-legged on the cave floor, and the other men followed suit, forming a loose circle around Marcus's bedroll. This shift in posture seemed significant, transforming the confrontation into something more like a council. I will tell you our situation, Marcus Holloway, and then you will understand the gravity of what Deklugi has done. Nate's voice took on a storytelling quality, and Marcus found himself pulled into the narrative despite his weakened state. We are the last free Apache in these mountains. Every other band has been driven onto the reservations or killed. The American government has sent soldiers, bounty hunters, and Indian scouts to find us. They have searched these canyons for 7 years without success because we know every hidden trail, every secret water source, every cave that cannot be seen from below. Our survival depends on complete isolation, Nate continued. No white man can know we exist here, because even one man's knowledge could bring the cavalry down upon us. Women and children live in this camp, 23 families who depend on our continued secrecy. By bringing you here, Deklugi has gambled not just with his own life, but with all of ours. Marcus understood now why the other warriors looked so angry. He wasn't just an unwelcome guest, he was a potential death sentence for everyone in the camp. Then why did you save me? Marcus asked, looking at Deklugi. If it puts everyone at risk, why not just leave me in the desert? Taza, the younger warrior, spoke for the first time in English, his accent thicker than his father's but still clear. Because we are not like the white men who let us die in the desert. Because the vision said you were important. And because my father does not ignore what the spirits show him, even when it would be easier. The simple conviction in those words struck Marcus harder than any eloquent speech could have. These men had risked everything, their safety, their family's safety, their entire way of life, because of a vision and a fundamental unwillingness to abandon someone in need. Marcus, who had spent his adult life in saloons and gambling halls where men would cut your throat for a silver dollar, found himself confronted with a kind of honor he'd only read about in dime novels. So what happens now? Marcus asked Nate. The old man smiled grimly. Now we wait for you to heal enough to travel. Then Deklugi and Taza will take you far from here and release you with enough supplies to reach the nearest town. You will never speak of this place or these people. You will never return to these mountains. And if you break this promise, Deklugi will hunt you to the ends of the earth and kill you slowly. This is the only mercy we can offer. It was a death sentence of a different kind, Marcus realized. They would heal him and release him, sending him back to the world he'd been crawling away from, back to Jimmy Cortez and the Morales gang, back to a life where his survival depended on the next card drawn or the next quick decision. But at least it was survival. I understand, Marcus said. And I give you my word, I'll never speak of this place. Nate nodded slowly, then spoke to the other warriors in Apache. One by one, they stood and filed out of the cave. Though their expressions made it clear they weren't happy with the arrangement, only Deklugi, Taza, and Nate remained. Your wound is infected, Nate said, returning to practical matters. The medicine Deklugi applied will fight the poison in your blood, but you will be weak for many days. You must eat and drink and sleep. In 1 week, if you are strong enough, we will discuss your departure. Over the following days, Marcus existed in a strange limbo between life and death, between two worlds that should never have intersected. Deklugi tended to his wound with a combination of traditional medicines and careful observation, changing the herbal poultices twice daily. The infection slowly receded, though the healing process was agonizing. Taza brought food mostly dried meat, corn cakes, and a bitter tea that Deklugi insisted would speed his recovery. but it was the glimpses of camp life beyond the cave that truly captured Marcus's attention. He could hear children playing in the distance, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls, women singing while they worked, men discussing hunting strategies and maintenance tasks. This wasn't a band of savage warriors hiding in the mountains. This was a community, a functioning society that had carved out an existence in one of the harshest environments on Earth. On the fourth day, when Marcus was finally strong enough to sit up without assistance, Taza brought him clean clothes to replace his blood-stiffened shirt. As Marcus changed, the young warrior watched him with undisguised curiosity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You have killed men," Taza said suddenly. It wasn't a question. Marcus paused, considering. His answer, "Yes, 3 men. 2 were trying to rob me. 1 was self-defense in a gunfight that went wrong. I'm not proud of it, but I won't lie about it either." Taza nodded as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. "My father saw this in you. He says you have the eyes of a warrior, even if you do not think of yourself this way. A warrior recognizes death and does not turn away from it." "I'm no warrior," Marcus protested. "I'm a gambler who's been running from one bad decision to another for most of his adult life." "Perhaps," Taza said with a slight smile. "Or perhaps you simply have not yet understood what you are." Before Marcus could respond, voices rose in alarm outside the cave. Taza was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the cave entrance with fluid speed. Daklugi appeared moments later, speaking rapidly to his son in Apache. Both men's faces were grim. Nate entered the cave, his expression darker than Marcus had yet seen it. He looked at Marcus with what might have been regret or might have been accusation. "Soldiers," Nate said simply. "A cavalry patrol has entered the eastern canyon, following tracks. They are 8 hours away, perhaps less. Someone has betrayed our location, or they have finally learned our secrets. Either way, we must abandon this camp immediately." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Did someone follow me here?" "We covered your trail," Daklugi said in his rumbling voice. "This is not because of you. But your presence here complicates our evacuation. You cannot travel quickly, and if we are caught with a white man in our camp, the soldiers will show no mercy. They will use it as proof that we have been raiding settlements." The implication hung heavy in the air. Marcus had become a liability, a piece of evidence that could destroy these people. And there was only one logical solution to that problem. "Leave me here," Marcus said quietly. "Give me a gun and some water, and I'll stay in the cave. The soldiers will find me and assume I wandered here on my own. I'll tell them I never saw any Apache." Nate stared at him for a long moment. "You would do this? Knowing that the soldiers might not believe you, knowing that you might face a court-martial for entering this territory?" "It's the least I can do," Marcus replied. "You saved my life when you had every reason to let me die. I'm not going to repay that by getting your families killed." Daklugi and Taza exchanged a glance that seemed to communicate volumes. Then Daklugi spoke to Nate in Apache, his tone urgent and insistent. The old man listened, his weathered face revealing nothing, before finally nodding. "Daklugi offers another solution," Nate said. "He will take you deeper into the mountains, to a place the soldiers cannot follow. But this means you will travel with us during the evacuation. You will see our secret trails and our hidden camps. This knowledge could destroy us if you ever chose to reveal it." Marcus understood the weight of what was being offered. They were choosing to trust him completely, gambling their people's survival on the word of a stranger they'd found dying in the desert. "I won't betray you," Marcus said, meeting each man's eyes in turn. "I swear it on whatever honor I have left." Taza smiled slightly. "Then we move now. Can you walk?" Marcus pushed himself to his feet, testing his strength. His shoulder throbbed with every movement, and his legs felt weak, but he could stand. He could move. "I can walk." "Good," Daklugi said, already moving to gather supplies. "Because we have a long journey ahead, and the soldiers are very close behind." The camp transformed into organized chaos within minutes. Marcus watched in awe as families dismantled their entire existence with practiced efficiency. Women bundled belongings into leather packs while children, silent and serious beyond their years, helped secure loads onto horses. Men moved through the camp systematically, erasing evidence of their presence, covering fire pits, scattering debris, obscuring footprints. It was like watching a village vanish into thin air. Daklugi handed Marcus a worn leather vest and a wide-brimmed hat that had clearly belonged to someone else. "Cover your face," the big warrior instructed. "From a distance you must look at Apache. Your pale skin will betray us if scouts see from the canyon rim." Taza appeared with a mixture of red ochre and clay, which he smeared across Marcus's exposed skin without ceremony. The young warrior worked quickly, transforming Marcus's sunburned face into something that might pass for native coloring at a distance. It felt absurd and desperate, but Marcus understood the necessity. One glimpse of a white man among the Apache would confirm every suspicion the cavalry held. Within 30 minutes, the entire band was ready to move. Marcus counted roughly 60 people, men, women, children, and elders, along with perhaps 40 horses and a dozen mules loaded with supplies. What struck him most was the absolute silence. Not a single child cried or complained. Not one horse whinnied unnecessarily. These people had turned stealth into an art form, and their lives depended on maintaining it. Nature approached a gray mare that looked as old and wise as its rider. "You will travel with Daklugi and Taza at the rear. If soldiers appear, you will hide while we lead them away. Do not reveal yourself unless absolutely necessary. Understood?" Marcus nodded, then asked the question that had been bothering him. "Where are we going?" "To a place the Spanish called El Santuario de las Sombras, the Sanctuary of Shadows," Nature replied. "It is 3 days' journey through terrain that will test even our strongest warriors. In your condition, it may test you beyond your limits. But it is the only place where 70 people can disappear completely." Before Marcus could respond, a warrior on the eastern ridge gave a bird call that sounded natural, but somehow different. Nature's expression tightened. "They are closer than we thought. We move now." The band began flowing out of the camp like water finding its path, splitting into 3 smaller groups that headed in different directions. Marcus realized this was intentional, multiple trails to confuse pursuers, making it harder to track the main group. Daklugi gestured for Marcus to follow, and they joined the central group heading northwest, into a narrow canyon that looked impassable from a distance. The trail, if it could be called that, was barely visible. It wound through rock formations that seemed to shift and change as they moved, creating natural blind spots that would hide their passage from anyone watching from above. Marcus's shoulders screamed with every jarring step, and his legs trembled from exertion, but he gritted his teeth and kept pace. Falling behind wasn't an option. They climbed steadily for 2 hours, ascending a series of switchbacks that Marcus would have sworn were too steep for horses. Yet the Apache animals navigated them with sure-footed confidence, their riders moving as one with their mounts. Marcus, on foot and struggling, found himself supported by Taza on one side and a young warrior named Chato on the other. Neither man spoke, but their assistance was matter-of-fact, without judgment or resentment. As the sun reached its zenith, they paused briefly in a shaded alcove where a spring trickled from the rock face. The water was ice-cold and tasted of minerals, and Marcus drank greedily while Daklugi kept watch on the back trail. The big warrior's eyes constantly scanned the horizon, reading the landscape for signs of pursuit. "Do you see them?" Marcus asked quietly. Daklugi shook his head. "Not yet, but they are there." I feel them like a storm coming over mountains. The cavalry commander is good better than most. He moves with patience, not rushing. This makes him dangerous. An elderly woman approached with strips of dried meat and a handful of piñon nuts. She looked at Marcus with open suspicion, but offered the food nonetheless. Marcus accepted with a nod of gratitude, recognizing that every scrap of food shared with him meant less for the community. The meat was tough and heavily salted, but his body craved the protein desperately. They moved again after only 15 minutes of rest, this time descending into a canyon system that seemed to fold in on itself like a maze. Marcus lost all sense of direction within the first hour, unable to determine which way was north or south. The Apache, however, moved with absolute certainty, following landmarks only they could recognize, a particular rock formation, a specific type of vegetation, subtle changes in the terrain that Marcus's untrained eyes couldn't identify. By late afternoon, Marcus's strength was failing. Each step became an act of will, and his vision began tunneling at the edges. He stumbled over a loose rock and would have fallen if Taza hadn't caught him. The young warrior steadied him, then called something to his father. Daklugi stopped the group and came back to assess Marcus. "I'm fine," Marcus protested, though they both knew it was a lie. "You are not fine. Your wound has opened." Daklugi pointed to the fresh blood seeping through Marcus's vest. "We stop soon. There is a place ahead." They continued for another agonizing hour before the canyon opened into a hidden valley that took Marcus's breath away. Towering rock walls surrounded a lush meadow fed by multiple springs, creating a pocket of green in the midst of the desert landscape. Ancient cottonwood trees provided shade, and wild grasses grew thick and tall. It was like stepping into a different world, a secret paradise hidden from the harsh reality beyond the canyon walls. The band dispersed throughout the valley with practiced efficiency, setting up a temporary camp that could be dismantled at a moment's notice. Fires where forbidden smoke could be seen for miles, so the evening meal was cold rations and water. Marcus collapsed against a cottonwood trunk, his body finally refusing to go further. A woman approached, middle-aged, with intelligent eyes and capable hands. She spoke to Daklugi in Apache, gesturing toward Marcus's shoulder. The big warrior nodded and moved aside, allowing her to examine the wound. She unwrapped Daklugi's bandaging with gentle efficiency, making small clicking sounds with her tongue as she assessed the damage. "This is Goyan," Daklugi introduced her. "She is our medicine woman. She will fix what I could not." Goyan spoke in Apache, her tone making it clear she was giving instructions, not asking permission. Daklugi translated. "She says you are stubborn like a wounded bear, but even bears must rest or they die. You will sleep here tonight while she treats the wound properly. Tomorrow, if you can walk, we will continue. If not, I carry you." The image of the 7-foot warrior carrying Marcus like a sack of grain would have been funny under different circumstances. Instead, Marcus just nodded wearily and allowed Goyan to work. She produced a leather pouch filled with fresh herbs he didn't recognize, crushing them into a paste with water from a clay bowl. The application burned less than Daklugi's original treatment, though Marcus still hissed through his teeth. As Goyan worked, other members of the band settled around the valley. Marcus noticed how they positioned themselves, always with clear sight lines to the entrances, always within signaling distance of each other. Even in this moment of rest, they remained vigilant, ready to flee at the slightest warning. Taza brought Marcus a blanket and a piece of flat bread that tasted of cornmeal and mesquite. "You did well today," the young warrior said, sitting cross-legged. Nearby, "My father was not certain you would make the climb." "I wasn't certain either," Marcus admitted. "How much further to this sanctuary place? 2 more days if we push hard. 3 if we must be cautious." Taza gazed up at the darkening sky where stars were beginning to appear. The soldiers will expect us to head south toward Mexico. Instead, we go north and west, deeper into the mountains where they believe no one can survive. This is why we have remained free while others have fallen." Marcus studied the young warrior's profile, noting the mixture of pride and sadness in his expression. "How old were you when this started?" "The running, I mean." "I was 8 winters when the last treaty was broken. My mother was killed in a raid by Mexican soldiers who burned our winter camp. We have been moving ever since, never staying anywhere longer than 1 season." Taz's voice was matter-of-fact, relating history rather than seeking sympathy. "I am 23 now. This is the only life I have known, always watching, always ready to run." The weight of those words settled over Marcus like a physical thing. This young man, who moved with such confidence and skill, had spent his entire adult life as a refugee in his own homeland. The injustice of it stirred something in Marcus that he hadn't felt in years: genuine anger at a system that could create such suffering. "Do you ever think about what it would be like to stop running?" Marcus asked quietly. Aza was silent for a long moment. "Every day. But thinking and reality are different things. The Americans will never let us live in peace, not while we remain free. To them, we are either dead or conquered. There is no third option." Before Marcus could respond, a whistle cut through the evening air, sharp and urgent. The entire camp froze. Then, as one, people began moving. Not panicking, Marcus noted, but executing a clearly rehearsed plan. Children were gathered, horses readied, supplies secured. All in absolute silence. Daklugi appeared beside Marcus, his rifle in hand. "Scouts on the eastern ridge. They have found our trail from the abandoned camp. We cannot move in darkness, too dangerous in these canyons. So we prepare to fight if they come at dawn." Marcus struggled to his feet despite Goyen's protests. "Give me a gun. I can shoot." "No." Daklugi's tone brooked no argument. "You can barely stand. You will stay hidden in the rocks with the children and elders. If soldiers come, you do not reveal yourself unless they discover you." Clear. It went against every instinct Marcus had developed in his years of gambling and brawling. The instinct to face danger head-on rather than hide from it. But he also recognized that his pride was less important than the safety of these people who had saved him. "Clear," Marcus agreed reluctantly. The night that followed was one of the longest Marcus had ever experienced. He sat wedged between boulders at the valley's far end, surrounded by silent children whose eyes reflected the starlight. Their mothers had positioned them here, in the most defensible and least accessible part of the valley, then returned to the perimeter where the warriors waited. Marcus counted 12 fighting men, positioned at strategic points around the valley's 3 entrances. They were outnumbered. A cavalry patrol would have at least 30 soldiers, but they held the high ground and the advantage of knowing the terrain. Still, Marcus had seen enough fights to know that numbers often mattered more than strategy. An elderly man sat near Marcus, cradling a rifle that looked older than he was. The man caught Marcus studying him and spoke in accented English. "I am Victorio's brother. I was at Tres Castillos when the Mexican soldiers ambushed us. I saw 50 warriors die in one day. I will not see it happen again." The name Victorio resonated. Marcus had heard stories of the great Apache leader who had fought the combined forces of the U.S. and Mexican armies to a standstill before finally being killed in Mexico. This old man carried that history in his eyes, a lifetime of resistance and loss. "How do you keep going?" Marcus asked. "After everything you've lost?" The old man smiled grimly. "Because surrender is slower death. On reservation, we die of disease and despair and broken promises. Here, we die free, is better death." As dawn approached, Marcus found himself thinking about those words. He'd spent years running from consequences, from commitments, from anything. That required him to be more than a transient presence in other people's lives. These people had no choice but to run, yet they maintained their dignity, their culture, their fundamental humanity in circumstances that would have broken most people. The first light of dawn revealed empty ridges. The scouts, if they had been there, were gone. But nature ordered the camp to remain alert, and warriors took turns keeping watch while others caught brief sleep. Marcus dozed fitfully, waking frequently to check the horizon for signs of soldiers. It wasn't until midday that they finally moved out, this time following a trail so narrow that horses had to go single file. The path wound through a slot canyon where the walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, blocking out all but a sliver of sky. The Apache moved through this natural corridor with practiced ease, but Marcus felt increasingly claustrophobic, aware that if soldiers appeared at either end, they would be trapped. After 3 hours of navigating the slot canyon, they emerged onto a high plateau that offered spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. But what captured Marcus's attention was the massive rock formation ahead, a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside, its entrance hidden behind a waterfall that cascaded down the cliff face. El Santuario de las Sombras, Daklugi announced. No white man has ever seen this place. Even Spanish explorers who searched these mountains for generations never found it. The band approached the waterfall, and Marcus realized there was a path behind the falling water, wide enough for horses to pass single file. They crossed through the spray, the roar of water deafening, emerging into a vast cavern system that defied belief. Natural light filtered through cracks and holes in the ceiling, illuminating a space large enough to house 100 people comfortably. Springs bubbled up from the stone floor, creating pools of clear water. Ancient pictographs covered the walls, images of hunts, ceremonies, and stories that predated any living memory. The air was cool and fresh, circulated by the same geological features that created the natural skylights. This place belonged to the Ancient Ones, Nate explained as the band began setting up camp in the cavern. Before my people, before the Spanish, before memory itself. We found it by following a medicine dream, and we have kept it secret for 3 generations. Here, we can survive a winter if necessary. Here, we are invisible to the world above. Marcus wandered deeper into the cavern system, discovering smaller chambers that branched off the main space, natural rooms that families were already claiming. He found Daklugi and Tiza in one such chamber, unpacking supplies with methodical care. "Why did you really save me?" Marcus asked suddenly. "And don't tell me it was just the vision. I need to understand." Daklugi paused in his work, then sat heavily on a boulder. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight Marcus hadn't heard before. 10 years ago, I was wounded in a fight with cavalry near Fort Bowie. I crawled into the desert to die, believing it was better than capture. An old prospector found me white man, crazy from too much sun and solitude. He carried me to his camp, treated my wounds, gave me food and water. When I was strong enough, he led me back toward my people's territory and let me go. He asked nothing in return. He did not even tell me his name. Daklugi met Marcus's eyes. I asked him why he helped an Apache warrior who might kill him when healed. He said, "Because a man dying is just a man dying. Don't matter what color his skin is or what gods he prays to. Leaving a man to die when you could help, that's what makes a monster." The big warrior stood and returned to unpacking supplies. "When I found you in desert, I saw that old prospector's face. I heard his words, and I understood that the world gives us chances to be better than our enemies. If I left you to die, I would become what they say we are, savages without honor or mercy. So I brought you here, knowing the risk, because that old man taught me that mercy is not weakness. It is the hardest form of strength." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of cynicism that had calcified over years of disappointment and betrayal. These people, who had every reason to hate him, had chosen to embody values that most civilized society only paid lip service to. "I don't deserve this. Marcus said quietly. No one deserves mercy, Taza interjected. That is what makes it mercy instead of payment. You did nothing to earn our help, but my father chose to give it anyway. Now you must choose what to do with the life you have been given. Before Marcus could formulate a response, shouts echoed through the cavern. Warriors were running toward the entrance, weapons ready. Marcus followed, his heart pounding, expecting to see soldiers pouring through the waterfall. Instead, he found the band gathered around a single figure who had just arrived, a young Apache man, barely more than a boy, bleeding from multiple wounds and barely able to stand. Warriors caught him before he collapsed, lowering him carefully to the stone floor. Nate knelt beside the young messenger, speaking urgently in Apache. The boy responded in gasping sentences, his voice growing weaker with each word. The gathered Apache listened in stunned silence, and Marcus watched their expressions transform from concern to horror to cold fury. When the boy finished speaking, Nate stood slowly, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. He spoke to his people in Apache, his voice heavy with grief and rage. Marcus didn't need a translation to understand that something terrible had happened. Daklugi turned to Marcus, his face carved from stone. The Eastern Band are cousins, 40 people including women, children. They surrendered 2 weeks ago. They went to the reservation believing the government's promises of food and protection. The big warrior paused, jaw working as he fought to control his emotions. 3 days ago, the soldiers accused them of stealing cattle. Without trial, without proof, they executed the headman and 12 warriors. The survivors have been imprisoned in conditions worse than animals. The messenger escaped to warn us, to tell us that the Americans are preparing a final campaign to eliminate every Apache not on the reservation. They are offering bounties now. $50 for every warrior killed. $25 for every woman or child captured. Marcus felt sick. My God, there is no God in this, Taza said bitterly. Only men who believe their greed justifies any cruelty. Goyen was already treating the young messenger's wounds, but Marcus could see it was likely too late. The boy had ridden for days with what looked like a gunshot wound to his abdomen, driven by determination alone. He had delivered his warning, and now his body was shutting down. The messenger spoke again, this time looking directly at Nate. The old headman nodded gravely, then responded in Apache. The boy smiled slightly, seeming to find peace in whatever had been said, and closed his eyes. Goyen continued working, but Marcus could tell from her expression that she was simply making the boy's final moments more comfortable. Within an hour, the young messenger died, surrounded by people who honored his courage even as they mourned his loss. His name had been Peso, Marcus learned, and he had been 15 years old. As the band prepared Peso's body for burial according to their customs, Marcus found himself standing at the cavern's entrance, staring out at the waterfall without really seeing it. The reality of the situation had finally crystallized for him with perfect, terrible clarity. These people weren't simply hiding from unjust laws or unreasonable demands. They were fighting for their very right to exist against a system that had decided their extinction was preferable to their freedom. And Marcus Holloway, gambler and drifter, had accidentally stumbled into the final chapter of their story. The question that haunted him as he watched the sun set through the waterfall was simple but devastating. What happens when the last free people on Earth run out of places to hide? The funeral ceremony for Peso took place at dawn, in a small chamber deep within the cavern where ancient smoke stains darkened the ceiling. Marcus watched from a respectful distance as Nate performed rituals that spoke of both sorrow and defiance. The boy's body was wrapped in deerskin and adorned with sacred objects, a warrior's honor despite his youth. Songs were sung in the old language, their melodies haunting and primal, carrying grief that transcended words. What struck Marcus most was the absence of despair. Yes, there was mourning deep and genuine, but underneath it ran a current of fierce determination. These people had buried too many loved ones to be broken by death. Instead, each loss seemed to harden their resolve, transforming grief into fuel for survival. After the ceremony, the band dispersed to their respective tasks with renewed purpose. Warriors checked weapons and ammunition. Women inventoried food, supplies, and medicine. Children were given responsibilities appropriate to their age, gathering firewood from the forest above, tending to the horses, maintaining the water supply. Everyone contributed because survival demanded it. Marcus found himself in an awkward position. His shoulder was healing faster than expected thanks to Goyen's treatments, but he was still weak and unfamiliar with the routines that governed camp life. He tried to help where he could, carrying water, organizing supplies, maintaining the fire pits, but his efforts were clumsy compared to the practiced efficiency of even the youngest children. On the third day in the sanctuary, Taza approached Marcus with a proposition. "My father says you must learn our ways if you are to stay here longer. Come, I will teach you." They climbed to the forest above the cavern, emerging through a concealed exit that Marcus hadn't known existed. The pine forest was thick and fragrant, offering cover from aerial observation while providing access to game and firewood. Taza led Marcus to a clearing where a dozen young warriors were practicing with weapons. "You know how to shoot?" Taza asked, offering Marcus a rifle, an older model Winchester that had seen considerable use. "I can handle a gun," Marcus confirmed, checking the weapon with practiced hands. "Not a sharpshooter, but I can hit what I aim at. Show me." Taza pointed to a dead tree about 50 yards distant where someone had carved a crude target. Marcus took his time, accounting for the rifle's sights and the slight cross-wind, then squeezed off a shot. The bullet struck low and left of center, not terrible for an unfamiliar weapon, but not impressive either. The young Apache warriors watched with barely concealed amusement. One of them, a lean man named Nadahe, made a comment in Apache that prompted laughter from the others. Taza didn't translate, but Marcus didn't need him to. He'd been on the receiving end of enough mockery to recognize it in any language. "Now watch," Taza said, taking the rifle. He fired from the hip without appearing to aim, and his bullet struck dead center in the target. He worked the lever action and fired 4 more times in rapid succession, each shot hitting within inches of the first. When he lowered the rifle, the target was effectively destroyed. "That's showing off," Marcus observed dryly, which earned him a rare smile from Taza. "Perhaps, but when soldiers come, there's no time for careful aim. You must shoot fast and accurate, or you die." Taza handed the rifle back to Marcus. "Try again. This time, do not think so much. Feel where the bullet wants to go." Marcus spent the next 2 hours under Taza's instruction, learning to shoot with instinct rather than calculation. It went against everything he'd been taught about marksmanship, but gradually he began to understand what Taza meant. The rifle became an extension of his body rather than a tool he wielded. His accuracy improved marginally, though he knew it would take months of practice to match even the youngest Apache warrior's skill. They moved on to other lessons, tracking, moving silently through the forest, reading signs that revealed the passage of animals and men. Marcus was humbled by how much he didn't know. What he'd considered survival skills were crude approximations compared to the Apache's intimate understanding of the land. "Your people treat the desert as an enemy to be conquered," Taza explained as they examined deer tracks near a stream. "We treat it as a teacher. The land tells us where to find water, when storms are coming, where game will be. We listen, and we survive." "And my people don't listen," Marcus said, not quite a question. "Your people hear only their own voices. They see only what they want to take." Taza straightened, his expression thoughtful. "But you are different. You listen. This is why my father believes you can be trusted." They returned to the sanctuary as evening fell, descending through the hidden entrance into the cavern's cool Embrace. Marcus found Daklugi waiting for him, the big warrior's face grave. Nate has called a council, Daklugi said. He wishes you to attend. This is unusual. Councils are for the people, but circumstances are unusual. The council gathered. In the main chamber, warriors and respected elders forming a circle, while the rest of the band watched from the periphery. Marcus sat beside Daklugi, acutely aware that he was the only white face in a sea of Apache. Nate stood at the center, backlit by the soft glow of carefully positioned oil lamps. We have a decision to make, Nate began, speaking in Apache. Daklugi translated quietly for Marcus's benefit. The messenger brought more than news of our cousin's fate. He brought a warning. The cavalry has a new commander, Colonel Raymond Ashford. This man is different from the others. He does not chase us blindly. He studies our patterns, learns our methods. He has Apache scouts working for him, traders who know our ways. Murmurs rippled through the gathered people, angry and fearful in equal measure. Ashford believes we are here, in these mountains, Nate continued. He cannot find us yet, but he is closing the circle. He has established camps at every water source within 30 miles. His strategy is not to hunt us directly, but to starve us out. When we leave this place to hunt or gather, his men will be waiting. An older warrior stood, his face weathered as ancient bark. Daklugi whispered his name, Chihuahua war leader. The man spoke at length, his voice carrying authority and frustration. Daklugi's translation came in fragments. Says we should split into smaller groups. Harder to track. Some go to Mexico. Others to the Northern Territories. But Nate shook his head. We have tried this before. Small groups survive longer, but die eventually. Together, we have strength. Apart, we are picked off one by one like wounded deer. Another voice joined the debate, a woman named Lozin, who Daklugi identified as a respected warrior and medicine woman. Her words were passionate, gestures emphatic. She says we should raid the military camps, Daklugi translated. Take their supplies and horses. Make them afraid to sleep at night. Fight back instead of always running. The council erupted in competing voices, some agreeing with Lozin's aggressive approach, others arguing for caution. Marcus watched Nayug carefully, seeing the weight of leadership on the old man's shoulders. Every decision could mean life or death for his people, and there were no good options remaining. Finally, Nate raised his hand for silence. When he spoke again, his voice carried resignation. There is another choice. One I have avoided speaking of because it means the end of our way of life. We could surrender. Go to the reservation. Accept their terms. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Marcus could feel the collective agony in that moment. The warrior who would rather die than submit. The mother who wanted her children to live regardless of the cost. The elder who had seen his entire world destroyed and couldn't bear to witness its final death. No. The word came from Daklugi, spoken with quiet finality. I have seen the reservation. My brother died there last winter, not from bullet or blade, but from the sickness of a broken spirit. He could not bear to see his children hungry, to see his wife reduced to begging for moldy flour and rancid meat. He walked into the desert. One night and never returned. The big warrior's voice cracked slightly. I will not follow him into that darkness. I will die free or not at all. Others voiced agreement, their words overlapping in a chorus of defiance. But Marcus also heard dissenting voices, pragmatic ones, pointing out that death served no purpose, that survival on any terms was preferable to extinction. Nate let them argue, saying nothing until eventually the voices died down and all eyes returned to him. The old headman looked older than Marcus had ever seen him, as if the weight of history itself pressed down on his shoulders. I cannot make this choice for you, Nate said finally. Each family must decide their own path. Those who wish to surrender, I will not stop you. You will go with my blessing and my sorrow. Those who choose to remain free, we will face whatever comes together. We will fight or run or hide as circumstances demand, but we will do so as free people until our last breath. He paused, then turned his gaze to Marcus. Our white guest has heard our counsel. This knowledge makes him dangerous to us. If he returns to his world and speaks of what he has seen and heard, we are finished. Yet we cannot hold him prisoner forever, and I will not order his death when he has done nothing to harm us. Marcus felt every eye in the cavern focus on him. The moment he'd been dreading had arrived, the moment when his presence could no longer be ignored or explained away. Nate continued, still addressing the council rather than Marcus directly. I propose we offer him a choice. He can leave now, return to his people with enough supplies to reach civilization. We will trust his word that he will not reveal our location. Or, the old man paused significantly, he can stay. Become one of us, learn our ways, share our fate. If he stays, he is no longer a guest but a member of this band, with all the responsibilities and dangers that entails. The proposal hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's mind raced through the implications. Leave and return to what? A life of cards and whiskey, running from one town to the next, always looking over his shoulder for Jimmy Cortez and his vendetta? He'd been dying inside long before that bullet found his shoulder. The desert had simply made the process physical. Rather than spiritual but stay, become Apache? The idea was absurd. He was a white gambler from Missouri, not a warrior. He knew nothing of their culture, their language, their way of seeing the world. He would be a burden, another mouth to feed when resources were already stretched thin. Yet as Marcus looked around the circle at Deklugi's stoic face, Taz's guarded hope, Goyen's measuring gaze, he realized something fundamental. For the first time in his adult life, he was part of something larger than himself. These people had shown him what honor actually looked like. Not the false nobility of saloon bravado, but real integrity forged in the crucible of impossible circumstances. I need to speak, Marcus said, his voice rough but steady. Deklugi started to translate, but Nate waved him silent. We understand English, the old man said. Speak. Marcus stood, feeling wobbly but determined. 3 weeks ago, I was a man with nothing to live for. I gambled because it was the only thing that made me feel alive. I drifted because I didn't have anywhere I wanted to be. When that bullet hit me, part of me was relieved. At least dying in the desert was decisive, a definite ending instead of a slow fade into nothing. He looked at Deklugi. Then this man found me. He had every reason to leave me there. I would have understood. I might have done the same in his position, but he didn't. He saved me, and in doing so, he gave me something I hadn't realized I'd lost a reason to keep fighting. Marcus turned to address the entire council. I don't pretend to understand your struggles or claim to share your history. I can't make up for what my people have done to yours. But I can choose how I spend the life I've been given. And I choose to spend it here with you for however long that lasts. If you'll have me. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and uncertain. Then Chihuahua, the war leader, spoke in Apache. Deklugi translated. He asks what skills you bring. What value do you offer? It was a fair question, brutally practical. Marcus considered carefully before answering. I can read and write English. I understand the military because I served 2 years in the cavalry before deserting. I know how the army thinks, how they organize their campaigns. I've been to most of the frontier towns and know which merchants can be bribed, which lawmen can be avoided, which trails the patrols favor. He paused. And I'm a good liar. The kind of good that comes from years of practice. If you need someone to go into towns for supplies or information, I can do that without raising suspicion. Lozin spoke up, her tone skeptical. Deklugi's translation was blunt. She says every white man claims to be different, to be friend to Apache. Then they betray us when it profits them. Why should we believe you are any different? You shouldn't, Marcus replied honestly. Belief should be earned, not given. All I'm asking for is the chance to earn it. Judge me by my actions, not my words. If I betray you, kill me. I won't fight it or complain. But until that happens, let me prove I'm worth the risk Daklugi took in saving me. Nate studied Marcus for a long moment, then looked at Daklugi. The big warrior nodded once, a simple gesture of support. Taza added his own nod, as did Goyan. One by one, members of the council signaled their acceptance or rejection. It was close. Marcus counted the faces and realized the decision hung on a razor's edge. Finally, Nate spoke. The council is divided, as is right when the decision carries great weight. But Daklugi saved your life, and that gives him a special voice in this matter. He vouches for you. Therefore, I accept his judgment. The old man's eyes bored into Marcus with uncomfortable intensity. But understand this, you will be watched constantly. One betrayal, one whispered word to your people, and you will die slowly. Not as punishment, but as warning to any who might follow. Do you accept these terms? I do, Marcus said without hesitation. Then from this moment, you are no longer Marcus Holloway, white man and gambler. You are ... Nate paused, considering. He spoke to Daklugi in Apache, a brief exchange, before turning back to Marcus. You are Yazani, which means one, who was lost but is found. This is your name among us. Use it, and become what it says. The formality of the moment struck Marcus with unexpected force. He was being given a new identity, a new life, but also accepting a burden he didn't fully understand yet. Around the circle, he saw acceptance from some faces, suspicion from others, and cautious hope from a few. The council concluded shortly. After, people dispersing to their evening routines. Marcus no, Yesani. He had to start thinking of himself by that name. Remained sitting, processing what had just happened. He'd made impulsive decisions before, but never one this irrevocable. There would be no going back from this choice. Daklugi approached, extending his hand in the white man's fashion. When Marcus took it, the warrior's grip was firm but not crushing. My father named you well. You were lost, and now you are found. But finding is only the beginning. The real work comes in becoming. I understand, Marcus Yasani replied. Where do I start? Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we begin teaching you to be Apache. It will not be easy. Our ways are not your ways. You will make many mistakes and suffer much frustration. But if you persist, if you truly commit, you may find the person you were meant to be. That night, lying on a bedroll in the chamber, he now shared with Daklugi and Taza, Marcus stared at the cavern ceiling and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Somewhere in the darkness, a mother sang a lullaby to her child, the melody foreign but the emotion universal. Somewhere else, warriors discussed patrol routes in hushed tones. The community continued its rhythms around him, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was part of something that mattered. He had no illusions about the path ahead. The cavalry was closing in. Resources were limited. Winter would come eventually, bringing new challenges. Death was probably waiting somewhere in the near future, violent and premature. But death was waiting for everyone, he reflected. The only question was what you did with the time before it arrived. And Marcus Holloway Yesani had finally found something worth living for, the real question. The one that kept him awake as the cavern settled into night's quiet, was whether he would prove worthy of the chance he'd been given. Whether he could transform from a selfish drifter into someone capable of the kind of courage and sacrifice he'd witnessed in these people. Time would tell. And time, he suspected, was in short supply. As exhaustion finally pulled him towards sleep. His last conscious thought was of Peso, the young messenger who had died delivering his warning. The boy had been given a choice to stay safe or risk everything to help his people. He'd chosen the harder path, and it had cost him his life. Yasani could only hope that when his own moment of choice came, he would prove half as brave. The transformation began before dawn. Yasani woke to Taza shaking his shoulder, the young warrior's face barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. "Come, training starts now." They climbed to the forest above, where a dozen warriors were already assembled. The morning air was sharp and cold, mist clinging to the pine trees like ghostly fingers. Chato, the lean warrior who had mocked Yasani's shooting days earlier, stepped forward with a knife in his hand. "Your hair," he said in broken English, gesturing to Yasani's shaggy brown locks, "too long. Makes you easy to grab and fight. We fix." What followed was a crude haircut that left Yasani's hair chopped short and uneven. It felt strange, exposed, but Chato nodded with satisfaction. "Better. Now you look less like a soft white man." The physical training was brutal. They ran through the forest trails, leaping over fallen logs and scrambling up rocky slopes until Yasani's lungs burned and his legs trembled. Every time he slowed, Nadahe would appear beside him with a sharp word or a challenging grin, pushing him forward. The warriors showed no mercy, but neither did they abandon him. When he finally collapsed after 2 hours, gasping and soaked with sweat, Taza offered him water and a grim smile. "You did not quit. This is good. Tomorrow will be harder." They moved to weapons training. Yasani learned to throw a knife with accuracy, to wield a tomahawk effectively, to fight with a short blade in close quarters. His body protested every movement, muscles screaming from overuse, but he gritted his teeth and continued. The Apache way seemed to be learning through repetition and pain, with little patience for complaints or weakness. "In battle, your body will be tired," Daklugi explained during a brief rest. "Your enemy will be tired too. The one who is trained through exhaustion is the one who survives." By midday, they returned to the sanctuary where Goyan was waiting with a less physical, but equally demanding lesson. She sat Yasani down beside a collection of plants and herbs spread on a blanket, each one carefully labeled with Apache names he couldn't pronounce. "You learn," she said firmly, pointing to a purple flower. "This Nakai Bika. Stop bleeding. You chew, make paste, put on a wound." She moved to a twisted root. "This Sadaba, for fever and infection. Boil in water, drink small amounts." For hours, Goyan drilled him on medicinal plants, their uses, preparation methods, and dosages. Yazani's head spun with information, but he forced himself to memorize each detail. This knowledge could mean the difference between life and death, not just for himself, but for others who might depend on him. The afternoon brought language lessons. Taza sat with him in a quiet corner of the cavern, teaching him basic Apache phrases. The language was unlike anything. Yasani had encountered complex tonal shifts that changed meaning, sounds that required positioning his tongue in unfamiliar ways. "Yathun," Taza repeated slowly. "This means it is good, or hello, say it." "Yathufa," Yasani attempted, mangling the pronunciation. "No, listen to the tones. Yat. Taza demonstrated again, patient but insistent. They worked through greetings, basic commands, words for common objects. Yazani's tongue stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds, but gradually he began to grasp the rhythm of the language. Children passing by would giggle at his mistakes, but a few of the braver ones stopped to help, coaching him through pronunciations with the innocent directness only children possess. One little girl, perhaps 6 years old, appointed herself his primary tutor. Her name was Kewekla, and she had no patience for his errors. "No, no, no," she would exclaim, stamping her foot. "Say it right. Shah Dianu my name is. Shah Dianu Yasani." By evening, Yasani could manage basic introductions and understand simple commands. It wasn't much, but Taza seemed satisfied with the progress. Learning language is like learning to track, the young warrior explained. First you see nothing. Then you see a few signs. Eventually, the whole story reveals itself. Be patient with yourself. The days fell into a punishing rhythm. Dawn training with the warriors, pushing his body beyond what he thought possible. Midday lessons with Goyan on medicine, plant identification, and healing techniques. Afternoons with Taza learning language and culture. Evenings helping with camp duties, maintaining weapons, preparing food, tending to horses. Yezani had never worked so hard in his life. His gambling existence had been one of late mornings, leisurely card games, and nights spent in saloons. This new life demanded everything from him, leaving no energy for self-pity or doubt. He collapsed into exhausted sleep each night, only to wake before dawn and do it all again. A week into his training, Daklugi took him on his first real patrol. They moved through the forest in a group of 5 warriors, traveling fast and silent. Yezani struggled to keep pace while maintaining the quiet that seemed to come naturally to his companions. Every snapping twig under his feet made him wince, expecting sharp rebukes, but Daklugi simply showed him how to place his feet differently, how to read the ground for stable footing, how to move with the forest rather than through it. The big warrior's teaching method was practical and immediate. Demonstrate, practice, correct, repeat. They reached a ridge overlooking the valley where Colonel Ashford had established his main camp. From their concealed position, Lazani counted at least 60 cavalry soldiers, plus additional scouts and support personnel. The camp was well organized, defensible, and clearly designed for extended occupation rather than temporary patrol. Daklugi observed in silence, his dark eyes cataloging every detail. Then he led them along the ridge, showing them 2 more camps, positioned to create a loose perimeter around the mountains. The strategy was clear. Ashford was building a containment net, not trying to find the Apache directly, but limiting their movement and access to resources. On the return journey, they encountered fresh horse tracks. The warriors stopped immediately, reading the signs with practiced ease. Daklugi examined the tracks, the disturbed vegetation, the scattered pebbles, and spoke in Apache to his companions. The discussion was brief and decisive. Cavalry patrol. 6 riders, Daklugi translated for Yazani's benefit. Moving north, maybe 4 hours ahead. They are searching, but they do not know what they are searching for. We will avoid them. They changed their route, circling wide to avoid any chance of encounter. As they traveled, Daklugi pointed out signs Yasani had missed, a broken branch at an unnatural angle indicating riders passing through, disturbed pine needles where horses had paused, the subtle differences between military horses' shoes, and unshod Apache ponies. You must learn to read the land like words on paper, Daklugi explained. Every mark tells a story. Who passed when they passed, where they were going, whether they were hurried or cautious. The land speaks constantly. Most men are deaf to it. Back at the sanctuary, Nate called a small meeting to discuss what they'd observed. Yazani listened as the war leaders debated response strategies. Some argued for raiding the camps to steal supplies and horses. Others advocated complete avoidance, believing any confrontation would reveal their approximate location. The discussion grew heated, voices rising in frustration. Finally, Nate made a decision. We will send a small party to Fort Breckenridge. Supplies are needed: ammunition, salt, tobacco, fabric for clothing. The fort has a trader who can be bribed. Yasani will go. His white face will not raise suspicion. The announcement surprised everyone, Yasani most of all. He'd been with the band barely 2 weeks, still stumbling through basic Apache phrases and struggling to keep pace on patrols. Now Nate wanted to send him into a military fort? He is not ready, Chihuahua objected. Immediately, He will make mistakes, reveal himself, lead soldiers back to us. He is ready enough, Nate countered. And we have no choice. Our Apache faces are known to the scouts working for Ashford. Any warrior we send will be recognized and followed. But a white drifter asking about work and buying supplies? This draws no attention. Daklugi spoke up, his voice calm but firm. I will go with him. Stay outside the fort, watch his back. If there is trouble, I will know. The plan was settled despite Chihuahua's continued objections. They would leave in 3 days, giving Yasani time to prepare his cover story and memorize the list of needed supplies. The mission was simple but dangerous. Get in, make the purchases, get out without raising suspicion. If cavalry officers questioned him, he needed believable answers. If scouts noticed him, he needed to appear unremarkable. Taza spent the next 3 days drilling Yazani on his story. He would be Marcus Holloway again, temporarily, a drifter recovering from illness who was heading to California to try his luck in the remaining gold fields. He'd wintered in these mountains, living off small game and what supplies he could carry. Now he needed to resupply before continuing his journey. The best lies are mostly truth, Taza advised. You were shot, you nearly die in the desert, you are recovering in the mountains. These things are real. You simply do not mention who helped. You recover. When people ask questions, give them enough truth that they stop asking. Joyan contributed to the disguise, providing clothes that looked worn and traveled, but not Apache. She studied Yazani critically, then produced a battered hat and a scratched pair of spectacles. Your eyes have changed, she observed. 2. Watchful now like a warrior. These glasses make you look weak, less dangerous. Good disguise. The morning of departure arrived with a cold drizzle that turned the forest floor slippery and treacherous. Daklugi and Yasani left the sanctuary in darkness, following trails that would bring them near Fort Breckenridge by mid-afternoon. The big warrior carried only essential supplies, moving with his usual fluid silence. Yazani tried to mirror his movements, applying lessons learned over the past 2 weeks. They spoke little during the journey, saving their energy for the miles ahead. But when they stopped to rest at noon, Daklugi shared jerked meat and spoke unexpectedly. When my brother decided to go to the reservation, I was angry with him. I thought him weak, thought he betrayed our way of life. But now I understand he made a choice he thought would save his family. He was wrong, but his intention was honorable. The warrior stared at the distant mountains, his expression distant. We all make choices based on what we believe is right. Sometimes we are mistaken. The measure of a man is not whether he makes perfect choices, but whether he stands by his decisions and learns from his mistakes. Yazani understood this was more than casual conversation. Daklugi was telling him that doubt was acceptable, that fear was natural, but that commitment mattered more than certainty. I'm afraid I'll fail, Yazani admitted quietly. That I'll say something wrong, do something that puts everyone in danger. Good, Daklugi replied. Fear makes you careful. Only fools have no fear. But do not let fear stop you from action. Feel the fear, acknowledge it, then do what must be done anyway. This is courage. They reached the ridge overlooking Fort Breckenridge by mid-afternoon. The fort was smaller than Yasani expected, a collection of wooden buildings surrounded by a log palisade, with perhaps 40 soldiers visible in the compound. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and he could hear the faint sounds of men shouting orders and horses neighing. Daklugi found a concealed position, with clear sight lines to the fort's main entrance. I will wait here. If you do not return by sunset, I will know there is trouble. But I cannot come for you, too dangerous. You will be on your own. The words were harsh but realistic. If Yasani was arrested or exposed, Daklugi couldn't risk revealing himself to rescue him. The mission's success depended entirely on Yazani's ability to play his role convincingly. "Understood," Yazani said, checking his appearance one final time. The worn clothes, the glasses, the battered hat all combined to create the image of a down-on-his-luck prospector. He hid his knife in his boot, kept his revolver visible on his hip. A man traveling alone in Apache country needed to be armed. And concealing weapons would raise more suspicion than carrying them openly. He descended from the ridge, following the main trail that led to the fort's entrance. His heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to walk with the tired shuffle of a man who'd been traveling hard. At the gate, 2 soldiers stopped him, their rifles held casually but ready. "State your business," the older soldier demanded, his eyes scanning Yazani with professional suspicion. "Name's Marcus Holloway," Yazana replied, letting his natural accent thicken slightly. "Been prospecting up in the mountains these past few months. Running low on supplies, heard there was a trader here who might sell to civilians." The soldier exchanged glances with his companion. "Prospecting? In Apache country? Either you're brave or stupid." "Probably a bit of both," Yazani admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "But the ore samples I've found suggest there might be silver up there. Worth the risk, I figure." This was a calculated gamble. Mentioning silver would explain his presence in the mountains and give him a reason to return, providing cover for future trips if needed. The soldier's expression shifted. From suspicion to interest. "Silver, huh? Whereabouts are you finding these samples?" "North of here, maybe 20 miles. Can't be more specific, you understand. Man finds a promising claim, he keeps it quiet." Yazani grinned conspiratorially. "But if it pans out, I might need partners. You boys are interested in making more than army wages?" The bribery was subtle but effective. The soldier's posture relaxed slightly. "Might be. You talk to Mr. Henderson at the trading post. Tell him Sergeant Briggs sent you. He'll treat you fair." Yazani tipped his hat in thanks and entered the fort, forcing himself to walk calmly. Despite his racing pulse, the compound was busy with afternoon activities, soldiers drilling, horses being tended, wagons being unloaded. He kept his eyes down, avoiding prolonged contact that might invite questions. The trading post was a squat building near the fort's center, its interior dark and cluttered with goods ranging from food staples to mining equipment. A middle-aged man with shrewd eyes looked up from his ledger as Yazani entered. "Help you, Mr. Henderson? Sergeant Briggs sent me. I need supplies, flour, salt, ammunition, some tobacco if you've got it. Fabric, too, for patching clothes." Yazani produced a small leather pouch containing coins he'd won in that fateful card game in Tucson. "I can pay cash." Henderson's eyes gleamed at the sight of money. "Cash is always welcome. What caliber ammunition you need?" They negotiated prices for the next 20 minutes. Henderson drove hard bargains, charging premium prices for goods that were common in settled territories, but scarce on the frontier. Yazani accepted the inflated costs without complaint, knowing that haggling too aggressively might seem suspicious. As Henderson wrapped the purchases, he made casual conversation. "You're the second prospector through here this month. Other fellow was heading into the Dragoon Mountains, said he was following some old Spanish maps. Seems like everyone's got gold fever these days." "Silver fever in my case," Yazani replied, maintaining his cover. "Though I'd settle for enough to buy a decent stake in California. These mountains are beautiful but lonely." "Lonely and dangerous," Henderson agreed. "We've got Apache trouble brewing. Colonel Ashford's convinced there's a band hiding somewhere in those peaks. Been sending patrols out regular-like, but they haven't found anything yet. You see any signs of Indians up there?" The question seemed casual, but Yazani detected the sharp attention behind it. Henderson wasn't just making conversation, he was gathering intelligence, possibly for sale to the military or to other interested parties. Seen old campfire sites, couple of times. Yasuni lied smoothly. But they were cold, maybe weeks old. Whoever made them was long gone. Mostly I've been alone, except for the wildlife. Ravens, dear, one mountain lion that scared 10 years. Off my life. Henderson laughed at the image. Well, you be careful out there. Ashford's got his men on edge. They see someone moving in those mountains. They're liable to shoot first and ask questions later. You might want to stay close to the fort for a while, let things settle down. Appreciate the advice, Yazani said, gathering his purchases. But I've got claims to work. Can't let fear keep me from making my fortune, right? He left the trading post with his supplies and his cover story intact, but his mind was racing. Henderson's mention of Ashford's patrols confirmed what they'd observed. The colonel was intensifying his search. More concerning was Henderson's casual mention of selling information. Men like him had connections everywhere, trading gossip and intelligence for profit. Yazani made his way back toward the fort entrance, nodding politely to soldiers he passed. He was almost clear when a voice called out behind him. "You there, prospector." His blood ran cold, but he turned slowly, keeping his expression neutral. A cavalry officer approached, a captain based on his insignia, with a weather-beaten face and sharp, intelligent eyes. "Captain Warren," the officer introduced himself. "Sergeant Briggs mentioned you've been prospecting north of here. I'd like to ask you a few questions about what you've seen." This was the moment Daklugi had warned him about. Military officers asking questions, probing for information. Yazani forced himself to breathe normally, to meet the captain's gaze without flinching. "Happy to help, Captain. Though I'm not sure what a prospector could tell you that your scouts haven't already reported." Warren smiled thinly. "Humor me. How long have you been in those mountains?" "About 3 months, on and off. I set up a base camp and work from there. But sometimes I head back to civilization for supplies, or just to hear another human voice." "And in those 3 months you've seen no Apache? No signs of recent activity?" Yazani shook his head. "Like I told Mr. Henderson, I've seen old campsites but nothing current. If there are Apache in those mountains, they're better at hiding than I am at finding silver. Yet you continue prospecting alone in territory we consider extremely dangerous." Warren's tone suggested disbelief. "Either you're uncommonly brave or uncommonly foolish. Or uncommonly broke," Yasani replied with a self-deprecating grin. "Man gets desperate enough, he'll take risks that might look foolish to others. Besides, I figure if the Apache wanted me dead, I'd be dead already. Maybe they see one lone prospector is not worth the effort." Warren studied him for a long moment, and Yasani could feel the weight of that scrutiny. The officer was trying to decide whether to believe him or dig deeper. Finally, Warren nodded slowly. "Perhaps you're right. Still, I'd advise extreme caution. We have intelligence suggesting hostile activity in that region. If you see anything at all, you'd be wise to report it immediately. The Army pays well for reliable information." The offer was clear. Become an informant. Trade information for money. Yazani understood that refusing outright might seem suspicious, so he nodded thoughtfully. "I'll keep that in mind, Captain. Though honestly, I hope to see nothing but rocks and empty canyons. I'm a prospector, not a scout. I leave the dangerous work to you military men." Warren accepted this with a slight smile, apparently satisfied. "Safe travels, Mr. Holloway. Perhaps we'll see you again when you've struck it rich." Yasani left the fort with his supplies, maintaining his casual pace until he was well out of sight of the walls. Then he allowed himself to breathe properly, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. The mission had succeeded, but it had been closer than comfortable. Captain Warren was no fool, and Henderson was clearly collecting information for profit. Found Daklugi waiting in the exact spot where he'd left him, the big warrior materializing from the landscape like a shadow gaining substance. Daklugi's eyes scanned Yeseni quickly, assessing his condition and noting the supplies. "You were longer than I expected," Daklugi said simply. "Army captain wanted to ask questions. I gave him nothing useful, but he's suspicious. They all are." Yeseni related the conversations with Henderson and Warren as they began the journey back to the sanctuary. Daklugi listened without interrupting, processing every detail. When Yeseni finished, the warrior nodded thoughtfully. "You did. Well, your story held, and you gathered information about their intentions. This is good intelligence. But the captain will remember you. If you return too often, he will begin to wonder. We must be careful with future visits." They traveled through the night, pushing hard to put distance between themselves and the fort. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson, Yaseni felt a strange sense of accomplishment. He'd faced his first real test and passed it. He'd maintained his cover, gathered supplies, and returned safely. More importantly, he'd proven, if only to himself, that he could contribute something valuable to the band's survival. He wasn't just a burden to be protected, but a resource to be utilized. When they finally reached the sanctuary, descending through the waterfall entrance as the sun climbed toward noon, Yaseni was exhausted, but somehow energized. Nate met them in the main cavern, his weathered face revealing nothing as Daklugi reported on the mission's success. Finally, the old headman looked at Yaseni directly. "You have done well, Yasane. You have earned the name we gave you. You were lost, and now you are found. More importantly, you are becoming useful." It was the closest thing to praise Naye ever gave, and coming from the stern headman, it meant more than any flowery compliment. Yasani nodded his acceptance, too tired for words. As he collapsed onto his bedroll, surrounded by the community that had adopted him, Yasane realized something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer pretending to be Apache or playing a role. He was becoming part of something real, something that mattered beyond his own survival. The transformation was far from complete. He still had so much to learn, so many ways he fell short of the warriors around him. But he'd taken the first true step on a journey that would change him forever. Outside the cavern, Colonel Ashford's army continued tightening its noose. Inside, a community prepared to resist with whatever tools and tricks they possessed. And somewhere in between, a former gambler named Marcus Holloway was discovering that the highest stakes weren't played at card tables but in the desperate struggle for freedom and dignity. The real game had only just begun. Winter arrived in the mountains with unexpected ferocity. Snow blanketed the forest above the sanctuary, sealing them in with nature's own fortress. For 6 weeks, the band remained hidden in the cavern system, living off stored supplies and the occasional hunting expedition when weather permitted. The cavalry camps below were forced to reduce their patrols, giving the Apache a temporary reprieve from constant vigilance. Yasini used this time to deepen his transformation. His Apache language skills improved dramatically through constant immersion, and he could now hold basic conversations without Taz's assistance. The children delighted in correcting his pronunciation, turning language lessons into games that made learning natural rather than forced. Little Kay Wakela remained his most devoted teacher, refusing to let him make mistakes without immediate correction. The enforced proximity of winter quarters revealed the community's true character to Yasini. He watched families share their last portions of food without complaint. He saw warriors maintain weapons they might never use again, simply because discipline demanded it. He observed elders teaching children traditional stories, ensuring that even if they didn't survive, their culture would live on in the next generation. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, Nate gathered the band for a storytelling circle. The old headman spoke of the Apache creation story, of how they had emerged from the underworld and been given this land as their sacred trust. His words painted pictures of a time before white men, before reservations, when the Apache ranged freely across territories that stretched from horizon to horizon. "We are the last keepers of these stories," Nate said, his voice heavy with both pride and sorrow. "When we are gone, who will remember how the coyote tricked the bear, or how the mountain spirits taught our ancestors to live in harmony with the desert? This is why we resist, not just to preserve our lives, but to preserve our memory of who we are." Yasini understood then that he wasn't just fighting for survival alongside these people. He was witnessing the final chapter of a story that had been written across centuries. Every day they remained free was a day that story continued, defying those who wanted to erase it completely. As winter began loosening its grip, scouts reported troubling news. Colonel Ashford hadn't withdrawn for the season, he'd merely been preparing. 3 new camps had been established during the winter, creating an even tighter perimeter. Worse, he'd recruited additional Apache scouts, former warriors who'd chosen survival over resistance and now tracked their own people for army wages. "We cannot stay here forever," Chihuahua argued during an emergency council. "Food stores are nearly depleted. We must hunt, and hunting means exposure. Ashford knows this. He is waiting for us to show ourselves." The debate raged for hours. Some advocated for a desperate raid to steal supplies and horses from the cavalry camps. Others suggested splitting the band again, sending the fastest warriors south to Mexico while the rest created diversions. Every option carried enormous risk with no guarantee of success. Yazani listened silently until Nate directly addressed him. "You have been quiet, Yazani. What does the white man in you suggest? How would Ashford think about this situation?" All eyes turned to him, and Yazani felt the weight of expectation. He'd been studying the situation from both sides, Apache survival instincts combined with understanding of military strategy. An idea had been forming, dangerous and unlikely, but possibly their only real chance. "Ashford is waiting for you to act predictably," Yosani began slowly, organizing his thoughts. "He expects you to run or raid or hide. What he doesn't expect is for you to approach him directly with an offer." Silence greeted this statement, broken by Chihuahua's harsh laugh. "Approach him? Surrender, you mean? I knew this white man would betray us eventually." "Not surrender," Yazani corrected firmly. "Negotiation. Ashford is under pressure from his superiors to resolve this situation. Hunting you indefinitely looks bad in Washington. But if he could claim a peaceful resolution, if he could report that the last free Apache agreed to terms that allow them to maintain dignity while technically complying with government policy, he becomes a hero instead of just another colonel chasing shadows." Daklugi leaned forward, interest flickering in his dark eyes. "What terms could we possibly accept that would not be surrender? What if we offered to restrict our territory voluntarily?" Yasini proposed. "We agree to remain in a specific region of the mountains. We agree not to raid settlements or attack travelers. In exchange, Ashford recognizes our right to live freely in that territory without military interference. We become, essentially, an unofficial reservation that governs itself." "The government would never accept this," Lozen objected. "They want us on their reservations where they can control us." "The government in Washington might not accept it," Yasini agreed. "But Ashford has significant autonomy in how he executes his orders. If he can report that hostile Apache have been contained and pose no further threat to settlers, can claim success. The details of that containment might not matter as much as the result. And if we're wrong, if he refuses, we've lost nothing but time." Naish stroked his weathered face thoughtfully. "This is a gambler's strategy. High risk, uncertain reward. But you are right that we have few other options." He looked around the circle. I would hear opinions from the war leaders. What followed was intense debate. Chihuahuas remained opposed, viewing any contact with Ashford as weakness. But Daklugi surprised everyone by supporting the idea, arguing that unconventional problems sometimes required unconventional solutions. Lawson was torn, seeing both the potential and the danger. Other voices joined the discussion, some angry, some cautiously hopeful, all aware that the decision could determine their survival or destruction. Finally, as dawn light began filtering through the cavern's natural skylights, Nate called for a vote. It was close, 9 warriors in favor, 7 opposed, with several abstentions. The headman nodded slowly, accepting the will of his council, even as uncertainty shadowed his face. Then we will attempt this negotiation, but we will not go as supplicants. We will go as warriors offering peace from a position of strength, not begging for mercy. He turned to Yasini. This was your idea. You will accompany Daklugi to meet with Ashford. If the colonel agrees to talk, you will serve as translator and advocate. If he refuses or attempts treachery, you will die alongside the Apache you have chosen to join. Do you accept this? I do, Yasini replied without hesitation. Preparations took 3 days. Daklugi selected 2 additional warriors, Taza, and a respected elder named Nana, to accompany them. 4 men approaching under a flag of truce, demonstrating peaceful intent while maintaining enough strength to defend themselves if betrayed. They rehearsed every aspect of the meeting, anticipating arguments Ashford might raise, preparing responses to potential objections. On the morning of departure, Goyan gave Yesenia a leather cord with a small turquoise stone for protection. She explained simply, "The stone carries prayers from our people. Wear it. Remember why you do this." Little Kewekla approached shyly, pressing something into his hand, a small carved figure of a bird. "So you come back," she whispered, then ran away before he could respond. The weight of responsibility settled on Yasini's shoulders like a physical burden. These people were trusting him with their future, betting everything on a strategy he'd proposed. If he was wrong, if Ashford responded with violence or treachery, he would carry that guilt to his grave, which might be measured in hours rather than years. They rode to the edge of Ashford's main camp, stopping just beyond rifle range. Daklugi tied a white cloth to his rifle barrel and held it high, the universal signal for parley. Then they waited, sitting motionless on their horses while cavalry soldiers scrambled to defensive positions. 20 minutes passed before a small group emerged from the camp. Colonel Ashford himself led them, flanked by 4 soldiers with rifles ready. The colonel was younger than Yasini expected, perhaps 40, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. He rode with the confidence of a man who'd spent his career in command, but also with the wariness of someone who'd learned that Apache encounters rarely went as expected. Ashford stopped 30 yards away, close enough for conversation, but far enough to prevent any sudden attack. His gaze swept over the 4 Apache riders, lingering on Yasini with obvious confusion. "I'm Colonel Raymond Ashford, United States Cavalry. Who speaks for you?" Yasini urged his horse forward slightly, keeping his hands visible. "I speak for them, Colonel. My name is Marcus Holloway, though the Apache call me Yasini. These warriors wish to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to your campaign." Ashford's eyebrows rose. "A white man riding with Apache? You're either extremely brave or extremely foolish, Mr. Holloway." "I've been told both, sir. Right now I'm hoping for brave." Yasini kept his tone respectful but firm. "These people saved my life when I was dying in the desert. I owe them the chance to speak their piece, and I believe you're a man who might listen." "I'm listening," Ashford said carefully. "Though I'll note that speaking of peace while you're actively evading army patrols seems contradictory." Daklugi spoke then, his English rough but clear. "We evade because you hunt us. We hunt us because we will not go to a reservation where our people die of disease and broken promises. This is circle with no end. We offer to break the circle." "How?" Ashford's tone suggested skepticism but also genuine curiosity. Yeseni laid out the proposal: territorial restriction in exchange for autonomy, peace in exchange for recognition of their right to exist freely in a defined region. He emphasized that the Apache would refrain from raids, would avoid contact with settlers, would essentially become invisible except for occasional necessary trading expeditions. In exchange, Yeseni concluded, you can report to Washington that you've successfully contained the hostile Apache without the cost of extended military campaigns. No more soldiers dying in these mountains. No more expensive patrols. Just peaceful coexistence in a region nobody else wants anyway. Ashford sat silent for a long moment, clearly weighing the proposal against his orders and his own judgment. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. What you're describing is essentially an independent Apache nation within U.S. territory. Washington would never officially authorize such an arrangement. Then don't ask for official authorization, Yeseni replied boldly. You have discretion in how you execute your mission. If the result is peace and security for settlers, does Washington really care about the mechanism? File reports that satisfy the bureaucrats while establishing a practical solution that actually works. A slight smile touched Ashford's lips. You argue like a lawyer, Mr. Holloway. Where did a drifter learn such persuasive rhetoric? Poker tables, mostly. You learn to read people and find arguments that resonate with what they want to hear. And, Colonel, respectfully, I think you're tired of this campaign. You're a smart man leading good soldiers in a mission that has no real victory condition. You can chase these people for years, maybe catch them eventually, maybe not. Or you can be the man who brought peace to this territory through wisdom rather than violence. The appeal to Ashford's ambition and intelligence was calculated, but Yeseni meant every word. The colonel was indeed trapped in an impossible situation, ordered to resolve a problem that had no military solution without committing atrocities that would haunt his conscience and career. I need time to consider this, Ashford said finally. And I need certain assurances. How do I know you're acting in good faith? How do I know this isn't a delaying tactic while you prepare to flee south? Daklugi responded immediately. You have my word as a warrior. If we say we will stay in this territory and live in peace, we will do this. Apache do not break word once it is given in parley. The word of a warrior I'm ordered to capture or kill. Ashford's tone was dry but not hostile. The word of a man. Who has more reason to hate you than you have to hate him? Daklugi countered. I have lost family to your soldiers. I have seen promises broken by your government. But I still offer peace because I am tired of watching children grow up knowing only fear and flight. If you reject this offer, we will fight until we are all dead. But if you accept, I will honor the agreement with my life. The raw honesty in Daklugi's words seemed to affect Ashford visibly. The colonel looked at each of the Apache riders in turn, then back to Yeseni. You've cast your lot with these people completely, haven't you? No going back to your own kind? They are my kind now, Yeseni said simply. I'm not asking you to understand that choice, just to respect it. Ashford nodded slowly. 3 days. Return here in 3 days, same time. I'll have my answer then. But Mr. Holloway, if this is some kind of trick, if any of my men are attacked in the interim, our next meeting will be with rifles instead of words. Understood, Colonel. 3 days. They returned to the sanctuary with the fragile hope of successful negotiation, but also the heavy knowledge that everything now depended on Ashford's decision. The band received the news with mixed reactions, some cautiously optimistic, others convinced they'd made a fatal mistake by revealing their willingness to negotiate. Those 3 days were among the longest of Yeseni's life. Every hour felt stretched tight with tension, everyone aware that their future hung in the balance. Warriors maintained constant watch on the cavalry camps, looking for any sign of treachery or preparation for attack. None came. Ashford was at least honoring the temporary truce while he considered the proposal. On the appointed day, they returned to the meeting site. Ashford was already there, this time accompanied by only 2 officers. The colonel's expression was unreadable. As they approached, "I've made my decision," Ashford began without preamble. "I'm going to take a significant risk and accept your proposal with conditions." Relief washed through Yazane, though he kept his expression neutral. Daklugi showed no reaction at all, waiting for the colonel to continue. "The territory you're allowed to occupy will be clearly defined, essentially the mountain range you're currently hiding in. You will have no contact with settlements or travelers beyond necessary trading, which must be conducted through designated intermediaries. You will harbor no fugitives from other bands or tribes." And Ashford paused significantly. "Mr. Holloway will serve as liaison between your people and my command. He'll report monthly on your status and relay any concerns from either side." The last condition was clever, Yasani realized. It gave Ashford a way to monitor the Apache, while also providing a communication channel that could prevent misunderstandings from escalating to violence. And it leveraged Yazani's unique position as someone trusted by both sides. "We accept these conditions," Daklugi said after a brief pause. "The liaison arrangement is acceptable. Yazani will represent us honorably. I'll need this in writing," Ashford added. "Not for Washington, they don't need to know the details, but for my own records and to ensure my successor understands the arrangement." "Can you sign a document?" "I can sign," Daklugi confirmed. "And Yazani can write words that express our agreement accurately." They spent the next hour drafting a formal agreement, Yazane serving as scribe while Daklugi and Ashford negotiated specific language. The document that emerged was part treaty, part practical arrangement, part gentleman's agreement between men who recognized each other as adversaries, but also as pragmatists seeking workable solutions. When both parties had signed, Daklugi, making his mark beside Azani's translation of his name, Ashford extended his hand to the big Apache warrior. After a moment's hesitation, Daklugi took it. The handshake was brief but significant, a symbolic moment that acknowledged their shared humanity despite being on opposite sides of an ugly conflict. "I don't know if this will work," Ashford admitted, "but I know that what we've been doing hasn't worked. So we try something different. And Mr. Holloway," he turned to Yazani, "you've got yourself one hell of a responsibility. Don't make me regret trusting you." "I won't, Colonel." The return to the sanctuary was triumphant but subdued. They'd achieved something remarkable: recognition of their right to exist freely, an end to constant persecution, a chance for children to grow up with stability instead of perpetual flight. But everyone understood this was a fragile peace, dependent on both sides honoring commitments that went against their natural instincts. Nate received the news with quiet satisfaction, though his weathered face showed the weight of leadership never fully lifted. "You have bought us time," he told Yazani. "Perhaps you have bought us a future. We will see. For now, we can live without looking over our shoulders every moment. This is a gift beyond price." That evening, the band celebrated with a feast drawn from carefully hoarded supplies. There was music, drums, and flutes, creating melodies that spoke of survival and resilience. Children played without the usual admonishments for silence. Adults allowed themselves to imagine a future that extended beyond the next season. Yazani found himself sitting with Daklugi and Taza, watching the celebration from the edge of the firelight. The big warrior passed a water skin, and they drank in companionable silence. "When you found me in the desert," Yazani said quietly, "did you know it would lead to this?" Daklugi shook his head. "I knew only that leaving you to die would make me less than I wish to be. Everything after that, your choice to stay, your idea for negotiation, Ashford's willingness to listen, these things I could not predict. But I believe the spirits work through us when we act with honor. Perhaps they brought you to that desert so you could be found. Perhaps your destiny and ours were always meant to intersect. Do you believe in destiny? Yasani asked. I believe in choices, Daklugi replied. Every moment we choose who we are and what we will become. Destiny is just the pattern that emerges from all those choices woven together. You chose to keep crawling when your body wanted to die. I chose to save you when it would have been easier to leave you. Ashford chose to trust our offer when he could have dismissed it. These choices created the pattern we see now. Taza added his own perspective. My father once told me that a warrior is not defined by how many enemies he kills, but by how he faces impossible choices. You faced an impossible choice in that fort: maintain your cover or risk exposure to help us. You chose correctly. Today, you faced another impossible choice: convince Ashford or watch us slowly starve. Again, you chose correctly. This is what makes you a warrior, regardless of the skin you were born in. The acceptance in those words settled something deep in Yazani's chest. He'd spent his life drifting, avoiding commitment, running from anything that demanded he be more than a transient presence. Now he'd found a place where he mattered, where his choices had weight and consequence, where he was part of something larger than his own survival. I was dead in that desert, Yasani said softly. Not just dying, already dead in every way that mattered. You didn't just save my life, Daklugi. You gave me a reason to have one. The big warrior placed a massive hand on Yazani's shoulder. Then we have given each other gifts. You gave us hope when we had only defiance. A fair trade, I think. As winter finally broke and spring crept into the mountains, the band settled into their new reality. They established permanent camps in the agreed-upon territory, built structures that would last seasons rather than weeks, planted gardens that would yield crops for the first time in years. Children attended lessons taught by elders without fear of sudden evacuation. Warriors hunted without expecting every sound to herald cavalry attack. Yasani fulfilled his role as liaison, making monthly trips to meet with Ashford or his designated officers. These meetings became routine status reports, minor issues resolved through discussion, occasional problems addressed before they escalated. The colonel kept his word, and the Apache kept theirs. The peace held, fragile but real. Months passed. Then a year. The band didn't forget their history or their losses, but they began to build new memories that weren't solely defined by conflict and flight. Marriages were celebrated. Children were born. Elders who'd expected to die on the run passed peacefully in their sleep, surrounded by family. And Marcus Holloway, the gambler who'd expected to die alone in the desert, found himself living a life he'd never imagined possible. He learned to track game with expertise that would have seemed magical to his former self. He could speak Apache fluently, thinking in the language as naturally as English. He married a widow named Desba, who'd lost her first husband to cavalry bullets years earlier, and together they raised her 2 children alongside the daughter they had together. He never forgot who he'd been, but he became someone entirely different, not white or Apache, but something in between, belonging to both worlds and neither, serving as bridge between cultures that had spent generations trying to destroy each other. 5 years after that desperate meeting with Ashford, Yazani stood on the ridge overlooking the valley where he'd first been found. Taza stood beside him, both men older now, marked by time and experience, but also by survival and achievement. Do you ever think about going back? Taza asked. To your old life? Yazani shook his head. I don't have an old life to go back to. That man died in the desert. I'm someone else now, someone better, I think. Or at least someone who matters to people who matter to me. My father says you fulfilled the vision, Taza said. He saw an eagle land on your chest, and the eagle spoke of a debt that must be repaid. The debt was not one you owed or that was owed to you. It was the debt between peoples who had forgotten how to see each other as human. By bridging that gap, you repaid a debt neither side knew they carried. They stood in silence, watching. The sun set over mountains that had witnessed countless cycles of violence and peace, loss and renewal. Somewhere in the valley below, the cavalry camp remained, a reminder that their peace was conditional and fragile. But for now it held. What happens when Ashford is replaced? Taza asked the question that haunted all of them. When a new colonel comes who knows nothing of our agreement, then we fight again, Yasani said simply. Or we negotiate again. Or we run again, but we'll face it together as we faced everything else. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find another way through. We've done the impossible once. Perhaps we can do it again. As darkness claimed the valley and stars emerged in the vast desert sky, Yasani thought about the strange path that had led him here. A bullet in Tucson. A desperate crawl through the desert. 2 giant Apache appearing like spirits from the heat waves. A choice that changed everything. He'd expected to die alone in the desert. Another forgotten drifter whose bones would bleach in the sun without anyone knowing or caring. Instead, he'd found family, purpose, and a destiny he could never have. Imagined, the Apache had a saying that Nate had taught him. Wisdom comes from unexpected places, and salvation often wears a strange face. Yazani had been the strange face that brought an unexpected solution, but the Apache had been his own salvation, showing him what it meant to live with honor, courage, and unwavering commitment to something larger than oneself. He was no longer Marcus Holloway, gambling drifter. He was Yasani, one who was lost but is found. And in finding himself, he'd help the people find a path through impossible darkness. The story would continue, with all its uncertainty and danger. But for this moment, standing on a mountain ridge with a friend beside him and a family waiting below, Yasani knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was exactly where he was meant to be, living the life he was meant to live, among the people he was meant to serve. And that was worth every hard step of the journey that had brought him here. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.